Posted by u/0univars. What's a conspiracy theory that later got proven to be true? The Lincoln assassination. That was a true conspiracy, with shadowy meetings and plans and everything. Besides Lincoln, they planned to kill the VP Johnson and Secretary of State Seward. Unlike movie conspirators, most of these guys were dolts. The VP assassin chickened out. Seward's would-be assassin succeeded in seriously wounding him but failed to kill him. JWB succeeded but was caught and killed a couple weeks later. They were all rounded up, and in the heat of the times were executed. Even Mary Surratt, who owned the boarding house where they met, was hanged. The doctor who set Booth's leg, broken during the escape, got 20 years in prison. People don't think of it as a classic conspiracy, because there wasn't a government or state-sponsored hand behind it. Try as they might, the feds could never find any proof that the Confederate leadership had anything to do with it. But it was a conspiracy nonetheless. A lot of Bernie Madoff's investors knew his fund was a scam. He had plenty of hedge fund quants and other sophisticated clients who understood there's no honest way to consistently outperform the market. They knew that a fund taking aggressive risks might beat the market most years, but it'll be up and down, some years way up, a few years flat. Nobody just churns out 11% can guarantee above market gains year after year. Not honestly, anyway. But they were wrong. Was what kind of scam Madoff was running. They assumed he was hooked up with an insider trading scheme. Somebody inside Apple, GM, GE&C, was leaking quarterly earnings figures to him a week before they were publicly announced, letting him load up, or dump, stock before the market reacted. Instead of blowing the whistle, these guys all bought into the scam. Of course, as it turns out, Madoff was just running a traditional Ponzi scheme. Use new investors' deposits to pay out all the withdrawals, then steal whatever's left over. And if you're claiming 11% returns, deposits are going to vastly outnumber withdrawals. I feel bad for his true victims, but a lot of the investors he ripped off could better be described as co-conspirators. The Epstein case really opened the door to conspiracies for me. I lost all trust in our government. Like this man had dirt on tons of high-level politicians and celebrities and magically kills himself before he has to testify? And nobody seems to be aggressively getting to the bottom of it? He was running child sex rings with world leaders. What the actual fuck? Why are we not up in arms over this? What's also shocking to me is how little the media covered it and how it's pretty much already blown over. What else has the government covered up? A rival of Thomas Jefferson revealed to the press that Jefferson had had an affair and several children with an enslaved person he owned, Sally Hemings, who was actually his late wife's half-sister. It was adamantly denied by the Jefferson family and historic foundations until recent DNA testing revealed it had been true. Edit. Just for further context, their arrangement was made while both Sally and Thomas were in France, where he was serving as American ambassador. At the time, Jefferson was age 44 to 46 while Hemings was age 14 to 16, and while Sally was a free woman while in France, there was certainly personal power dynamics at play. Sally, being only 1/8 African herself and by many accounts was passable, who could have chosen to stay in France, which was in poverty at the time on the edge of the French Revolution, made the decision to return to slavery in America under the stipulation that any children she would have would be freed at age 21. Sally also had a brother, James, who Jefferson brought to France to be trained in French cuisine, who also agreed to return to enslavement. To give context, whether there was affection and legitimate romance is unclear, as their relationship was never legitimized in Jefferson's writings or otherwise. The writings left from Sally's children say he never showed them any affection, though the Hemings were said to have received preferential treatment even before the arrangement. All 5 of Sally's surviving children were freed under the agreement, and when Jefferson died, Sally was given her time, no longer given forced tasks but never freed. When Sally died, she was buried in an unmarked enslaved person's grave. That China harvests organs from their prisoners. The first rumors came out in the early 2000s, but everyone dismissed it since it came from Falun Gong practitioners, which were like a Chinese Buddhist cult. If you lived in any major city, you'd see them passing out flyers and protesting in front of Chinese embassies, and no one believed them. 20 years later, we all know it to be true. It may seem unthinkable now, but just a few decades ago the idea that the Catholic Church was knowingly harboring pedophiles among its ranks, and would move those child molesters to different locations with fresh victims when the people at their current location became suspicious, was thought to be a conspiracy theory only believed by total tinfoil hat nutcases. Shame it turned out to be horribly true. And the Catholic Church still hasn't cleaned up their act. If the choir boys are in less danger now, It's not because the church has cracked down on the predators, it's because normal people now know not to leave their kid alone with Father McFeely. Probably the most recent one that we didn't have enough time to label as a conspiracy theory was a couple of months ago, when AI firms started picking up anomalous spikes in pneumonia-related deaths and started talking about the fact that there is another, unknown pandemic going on that's killing people but mislabeled as pneumonia. Edit. Here is an article about how a Canadian startup spotted it 9 days before WHO announced the pandemic. My comment about is mainly conjecture, but I think it is very plausible that Blue Dot is not the only startup research group picked up on the fact that something is going on. Most of us, including myself, have anecdotes regarding themselves or relatives going through horrible illnesses late 19. There is meaningful trends in retrospect, so there must be trends back then that must have triggered something, any statistical engine analyzing the data, if any. MKUltra. CIA Mind Control and Behavior Modification Program. There were a lot of different conspiracies about it and it turned out to be true. Some notorious people were subjects in the program, including the Unabomber and Whitey Bulger. There is an underlying theory that the project never stopped and is ongoing even today. Every single email being recorded by the US government, or rather the government spying on the entire nation without us ever really knowing it. Someone told me that shit when I was a teenager and I mocked them for such a foolish thought. And I was a geek. I knew how computers and networks and all that jazz worked. I just never thought the US would create goddamn data farms and sit there capturing every email sent. They have drives upon drives upon drives of data. So much that there is nowhere near enough staff to go through them all. And it took a hero named Edward Snowden to tell us the truth. And how does my country repay doing the right thing? They outcast him and call him a criminal, when they were the criminals to begin with. So fucking arrogant of me to think my government couldn't be that corrupt. And so disgusting that a good, honest man is chased from the country he loved. Fuck you, US government. IDC if you're a Dem, pub, centralist, whatever. You're all a bunch of corrupt little shits. And Snowden, in the highly unlikely event you're reading this, thank you. Thank you so much. There was a conspiracy that used to go around that a bunch of politicians, business owners, and actors spent 2 weeks in the California woods having orgies and sacrificing children. It was sometime between 1999 and 2001, but Alex Jones, who at the time was new to the reporting world, contacted the BBC and told them he wanted to prove the conspiracy. They sent him a BBC reporter and a camera and they snuck into the supposed camp and captured footage of actors and politicians camping out together and burning child effigies in front of a giant owl statue. After 9/11 though, the shock factor quickly got tossed to the wind. But, it was still proved, still happens, and there's still footage of the cremation of care ceremony at Bohemian Grove. There was this one time the US sold arms to Iran that were under embargo to fund anti-communist rebels in Latin America. There was this one time the bank HSBC trafficked money to terrorist organizations in the Middle East by modifying the names of their account holders by adding hyphens or spaces and changing capitalization, for example Osama bin Laden instead of Osama bin Laden. When this was discovered, no one got charged with any crimes. They also did the same thing for drug cartels. Hillsborough Stadium disaster. Police and government spent years covering up their own incompetence, blaming the fans, amending witness statements, amending times of death, etc. The police account was largely believed by the majority of the UK 15-20 years later. The families fought for justice and truth for 20+ years to expose their lives and deceit. The one according to which a Masonic lodge was planning to control Italian media in the 80s, together with organizing domestic terror attacks. Long story short. In the mid-70s an obscure Italian Masonic lodge called Propaganda 2, hence the abbreviation P2, slowly turned into a clandestine ultra-right organization, and in a decade it organized several high-profile criminal acts in Italy, including murders, kidnappings, and bribes. Its members included very powerful people from across the power spectrum, including journalists, military officials, and politicians, yes, even Berlusconi. Its leader had a well-defined aim. He outlined it in his manifesto plan for democratic rebirth, which called for a consolidation of the media, suppression of trade unions, and the rewriting of the Italian constitution. You can read more on it on Wikipedia. The musical artist MIA was largely mocked by music publications in 2010 for her lyrics in her song The Message. Headphone connects to the headphones, headphones connect to the iPhone, iPhone connected to the internet, connected to the Google, connected to the government. They claimed it was unfounded paranoia. After the Snowden revelations regarding US surveillance programs like PRISM, this lyric suddenly didn't seem so crazy. Music publication Pitchfork admitted they were wrong about the song in a subsequent MIA review. Okay, that's very local. In Brazil, we had this left-wing president who received lots of hate. Even 9 years after he left the presidency, he still is used as a way to convince people that lefties are bad, and that was a rumor that he'd try to run again. There were some allegations against him and they rushed a lot to get him into prison. People were saying that the judge had an agreement with one of the candidates to become a minister once he got elected if the guy was arrested. Guess what? I'm sure this has been mentioned already, but the story of the E.T. game for the Atari is one that sticks out to me. In 1981, Atari had gotten a lot of sales from their systems and games and had ordered for all of the next year's orders to be manufactured as fast as possible. This caused some games like E.T. to be very rushed and low quality, and sales had really slowed down. After a ton of backlash by players and lots of people calling it the worst game ever, there were rumors that the developers of the game buried the remaining copies of the game somewhere in a nearby landfill. New York Times had reported on the supposed burial of the company's failed games, but they had tried to deny it in order to prevent the site from being dug up to look for the cartridges. This theory wasn't proven for 31 years until a few big companies in April of 2014 tried to excavate the site to find them in order to make a documentary about the whole situation called Atari Game Over. They were able to dig up about 1,300 cartridges of various Atari games during this period, most of which went to various institutions and museums including the Smithsonian, the New Mexico Museum of Space History, and Lightbox and Fuel Entertainment, the company that directed the documentary.